Welcome back, everybody. It's that time of the year. It's time for the In the Clutch podcast return. I'm Cody Roskens. Alongside me, my two co-hosts, Gavin Russell and Jonathan Michael. Fellas, it has been just about 365 days. Week one has just passed. How are we feeling after week one?
Honestly, feel pretty great. We had two games on Clutch Sports Media that we thought were going to be close games, turned out to be blowouts. Obviously, it's still very early in the season. Can't draw too many conclusions yet, but it's really good to see a lot of teams back in action. And I was really impressed with how a lot of Peoria and Bloomington normal area teams did. I saw some big wins, saw some small upsets, even saw some wins from some teams that don't win very much. So it was all in all a great week one, all across the board.
Yeah, it was a great first week, and kind of as John mentioned, maybe some games that went a direction we didn't expect. Some really big affairs, as normal community came out top big, and Rochester as well. But again, teams are still getting up to speed. A lot of new faces in the area, so a few conclusions, but definitely going to be excited to see what happens in the remaining 8 weeks.
For sure. John, you touched on it, and so did you, Gavin, about our games from last week. It kind of begs the question, how did last week's games go? Me and John, we were at Peoria High, Rochester. Gavin, you were elsewhere. John, we'll start off with, I guess, our game first. What were your kind of thoughts on Peoria High, Rochester?
Yeah, obviously, after the game, I kind of realized I almost felt bad because I felt like I was almost being a little bit too harsh to Peoria High on the broadcast. At least I maybe felt that way in the moment, but obviously it's still a new team and everything. I mean, not everybody is already firing on all cylinders week one, and I think Peoria High obviously just has lots of high expectations and everything. I think it's kind of easy to forget that they don't have some of the guys from last year. They are still ironing out some things, but overall, I mean, I think like you said on the broadcast, they won the second half. Got some of the backup guys in, and they all looked good. Obviously, they probably hope that those guys come into the game under different circumstances, and we going forward. But I definitely think that Tino Gist, obviously, I think just had a real quick dud of a week. I'm sure he'll bounce back. Malik Ross, I think will get his legs under him. Figuratively and literally at running back and everything. And I think the big key for Peoria High, I think, is going to be their defense. Obviously, Rochester had a pretty good offense, and we kind of knew that coming into the game. With so much turnover on the defensive side of the ball. I think the big thing to look out for the Lions is can they get their defense back up to the point where it was last year. But this, again, still 8 weeks left to do that. I'm not too worried about Peoria High.
No, and I wouldn't be either. I wasn't there at that game, but everything that I've seen, talking to Tim Thornton, writing their preview, he just wants to embrace the challenge of the schedule. And he knows Rochester was a really good week one test for him. I'm not saying Tim Thornton expected to go out there and lose. I'm not saying he expected things to go like that. But he just wanted to see his team be challenged. And maybe he knows this is what they needed to come out of the gate. Maybe to, humble them a little bit, bring them back down to earth, fix a few things. But at the end of the day, he knows he has an outstanding group and a very talented core of players. I definitely think that they rebound. They're a team that still definitely is in the 7 to 8 win range. If they won out the season, it wouldn't shock me. And they'd be looking back at week one and saying, okay, we've come a long way since then. So big things on the horizon for Peoria High, but a lot of credit to Rochester for coming in and punching them in the mouth in week one.
Yeah, I think those are two pretty valid points. I think me and John hit it right on the head a lot during the broadcast. That's kind of why you schedule a Rochester week one, is to kind of really expose what you aren't good at and maybe what you are a little better at. And a team like Rochester, when they run a lot of man beaters and stuff like that, against a defense like Peoria High that's very man defense heavy and likes to pack it in on the box, that can be really tough. But moving ahead, Gavin, we weren't at your game, but you had a bit of a longer night than both Jonathan and I. I guess that's the polite way of putting it. How'd your game go?
Yeah, I did not get home till the next day, so it was Saturday night, or Saturday morning rather, before I got back to my residence in the Peoria area. But we had a lightning delay. The game got cut short in the first half with the lightning, and we had about 6 minutes to go in the second quarter. So didn't get through a lot of it before we got a stoppage. But normal community kind of had a little bit of the momentum going into that hour or so delay. And then as soon as we came back from that break, immediately grabbed that momentum. So obviously, football is a game based on momentum. One drive, one big stop can really turn the tide of a game. Normal Community did not let the break phase them. They used the home crowd to their advantage, and the reigning state champion Cyclones went down in big fashion. Again, SHG, a team with a lot of new parts, a new coach, a lot of new starters, so I wouldn't be too worried if you're an SHG fan. But Normal Community, you guys look pretty good in week one. I'd be excited what the Ironmen have to offer this season.
And if I can just say one thing about that SHG community game, it's summed up pretty simply. That's why you have different postseason classes. I mean, SHG is still going to be really good, but a team that really is technically SHG is actually the size of a 4A school, but due to their success factor, which you can get all in the weeds in that. But essentially, SHG is playing 5A this year because of their 2-year most recent success and everything. And obviously, they're playing a 7A school and not only any 7A school, but a very good 7A school in Normal Community. Ironmen were a team that coming into the year I was really high on. I'd even go as far to say I think that they're, at least in my mind, probably the favorites in the Big 12. Lots of players returning, especially on the defensive end. And I think their offense looked good. Kalen Taylor, the younger brother of former Ironman running back Chris Taylor, really impressed. Tommy Davis is still there. Marquand Gary leads a deep group of receivers. And Normal Community's also got a really good line as well, led by Mac Brennan and Dexter Beecamp. So I talked with the Ironman before the season. I think they're not getting too ahead of themselves, but they know that they have the potential to do some special things this year.
Yeah, I think that pretty much puts a bow on it. As good as we could, I guess, for week one for our two games. Obviously, there's some window dressing done on the scoreboard to a degree for some teams. Other games, though, that kind of surprised us. John, I'll start with you, and then we'll go to Gavin. What are some other area? I know we talked about during halftime some scores that surprised us. What really did you take away from week one from games that we didn't cover?
Well, first of all, I was made to look like a fool in our inaugural CSM pick. I'm picking against Morton and Metamora. Both those teams really impressed me a lot. I really wish that we could have been in Morton that night. It looked like an amazing game. There was a Potters player who had his sister who is part of the military come back, surprise him before kickoff. So they had that. It's home opener against Muhammad Seymour, who Morton's gotten pretty familiar with over the last couple of years. So even though they're not in the same conference and not really within an hour's driving distance of each other, I think it's a fairly good, I guess, maybe pseudo rivalry, maybe a good non-conference rivalry. But I mean, Morton just stepped up, made big plays. Brett Michael was great. Shondon Buffington, my word, that guy came out of nowhere. I talked to the Potters before the season started, and I was asking about how their running back was, and obviously I knew Brett Michael was going to be a key factor for them. With Carl Whitaker gone from last year. And Brett told me himself, he said, Shondon Buffington, and I quote, he said, he's a dog. And I said, okay, I just kind of put it in my back pocket thinking, I haven't seen him play. I don't know if he played much in varsity last year, but man, he stepped on the scene, rushed for about 200 yards. And when you have him and Michael just going back and forth in the background, it takes a ton of pressure off of Jude Hart, the Morton, passing attack. Obviously Hart, I think, is one of the better quarterbacks in the middle line. I think with a great ground attack really opens it up. Really impressive win for the Potters on both sides of the ball.
Yeah, and Brett Michael, your long lost cousin,
who's
John,
not
definitely one of the better
I
players.
can almost
who's not?
you
Just
he's
kidding.
Not related, but you never know. Never know.
But the similarities there are interesting, though. But Morton obviously came out and picked up a big one right there. That's a big one to just kind of get things rolling. A new head coach over there, and some guys coming back. So you like to build that confidence, but kind of as a whole, with the games, there was not a lot of games that were necessarily close. I know Morton and Washington played one-score games. A lot of the other games were decided by multiple touchdowns. But I don't think that tells the whole story with some of the teams. I think there were definitely some teams that came in competitive. They played well for maybe a half or three quarters. They just kind of let down at the end, and some teams ran away, or vice versa. We saw big performances. Bloomington, 41-0 over Richwoods. That's definitely a big one. Pekin coming out playing Rolling Meadows on the road, 19-7. So definitely a variety of scores. I think that's definitely something that we saw in week one. But I think we kind of saw in week one who's going to be competitive and who's not going to be competitive. I really like what I saw from Dunlap. It's the game I'll touch on here. I know Dunlap fans probably going to get the pitchforks and torches and come after me for picking against them in week one. But Dunlap proved me wrong. And even with a younger team, with a lot of new parts, a couple of sophomore quarterbacks, they came out and they did their thing. The Eagles are definitely going to be soaring this season in the Mid-Atlantic.
Cody, I saw you kind of look down and laugh for a second when Gavin talked
Well,
about
the only reason I say that is because Gavin at this point has gotten the Charles Barkley treatment when it comes to when teams he picked. Because if memory recalls, Gavin went like 3-6 this last week in the pick'ems, and me and Larry each went 8-2.
It's pretty bad, yeah.
So I'm just saying, Dunlap fans, don't worry if Gavin picks you. Might even picks you. Or if he does pick you, should be worried because so far Gavin has not been very good through 1 week. Hey. But moving along, guys, we'll go ahead and I guess we kind of already got to it. But if you could just pick one team or player that really wowed you this last week, who would it be? Let's go 15 seconds or less, starting with John.
Oh boy, put me on the spot. There's so many players I think that I could really name. There's so many good performances we saw. I know you said 15 seconds left. I'll probably use that already up. Real quick, I'm going to go Mason Bowles from Eureka out in the Heart of Illinois Conference. Probably one of the best, performances on both sides of the ball. Ran for 2 scores, made 11 tackles. I think had like 3.5 TFLs and a sack. Eureka is a pretty young team this year, but they do have a good amount of returners. They really impressed in a big 49-6 win over Canton. So I'm really keeping an eye on the Hornets. I think they could be an interesting team to watch this year.
I'm going to pick 11 guys and go with the Normal Community defense. They had a really good showing in week one. Of course, SHG still getting their legs under them. But 2 pick sixes, that's no joke. A number of big stops, some sacks, some pressures. Really nice stuff from the Ironman defense.
Very good. I shouldn't say that was close to 15 seconds or less, but ballparking it. Kind of going more so down the avenue we were just on. Way too early season predictions. Obviously, we didn't get a show out before week one. We were scrambling around with a lot of the newer stuff, but we're here now through 1 week. We're going to just kind of do it as we normally would. John, your way too early season predictions.
Yeah, I mean, I think you can make a lot of them. And by the way, for anyone watching, these, are supposed to be taken seriously, but also not because there's a reason they're way too early. So I look forward to, maybe some of these being wrong. I have a couple. One of them is that, and this one may not even be that too hot of a take, but I think Bloomington makes the playoffs this year with 17 returners coming back this year. And I heard about that, plus their entire line. I mean, Cody, you talk all the time about how far your line can take you in high school football. And, Bloomington really just, put the hammer down on Richwoods in a big 41-0 win. Last year in that same game, I believe those two teams faced off in week one, and it was a lot closer. And I believe Bloomington went either 3-6 or 4-5 last year, if I remember correctly. So I think big things are in store for the Purple Raiders. I think AJ Codron is a great running quarterback, I should say, for the Purple Raiders. Got some nice players on the line and on defense as well. And also, I know there's some teams in the Big 12 that, are almost shoo-ins to make the playoffs every year, such as like Normal West, Normal Community, Peoria High. You can maybe even throw Centennial in there, possibly Danville as well. I also think Peoria Notre Dame will make the playoffs this year as well. Again, not too hot of a take, but, after some close losses last year, I think the Irish are going to have definitely a bounce back year as well. So they won 33-12 against Manual back on Friday. So I look forward to seeing what Pat Armstrong's squad can do the rest of the year.
Yeah, I'm going to go small school here, and after a really good week one showing, I like DMAC to possibly win their conference. That's a pretty highly touted conference with a lot of really good teams. Tri-Valley, Eureka, all part of that over in the HOIC, but DMAC looks like a different animal, and they've had a couple of down years. You might think they're in hibernation a little bit. They've been close, but now they're really ready to let loose. They've got some senior stars. You can read about them in our preview, CSM Overtime. Tice Albritton, Britt Denniston. They've got some really big guys coming out this year. They're more experienced than they've been in recent years. Cody Meyer's group could be playing for a conference chip.
Yeah, I think so. And Cody, not to interrupt you as well. I know. I think all three of us were talking before the season about, it was, kind of before the year. I mean, I think the consensus was, Washington was the favorite in the Mid-Atlantic. Normal Community and Peoria High are probably the favorites in the Big 12. We don't know who's the favorite right now in the HLSC is, and obviously, it's so early in the season. Again, it's tough to put a thumb down on it, but you got Tri-Valley, who lost a lot from last year, but bounced back with a big win. Eureka obviously kind of had the same. DMAC has a lot of players returning this year. Maybe this could be their year. I certainly think it could be. You can't forget about El Paso Gridley either. They had a big week 1 win over Macon Meridian, 49-20. So if there's anybody, maybe you don't know about, Cameron Schumacher, quarterback on the El Paso Gridley Titans, definitely going to be a name to watch this year. Can do it all for them. So, I mean, even just there, you got 4 teams in the HOI. And also, while we're on the topic of the conference, I just want to mention over in the HOIC small division, I want to give a big shout out to the Fieldcrest Knights, who won their first on-field game, I believe, since April. I don't know the exact date, but I want to say April 9th of 2020, back during the COVID season. They beat Dwight Gardner, South Wilmington, 20-19. They picked up a forfeit win last year against Fisher, but obviously it's not really an on-field win. So I'm sure Fieldcrest is feeling really good, and I think they bring back a lot this year. So, good things happening out in Minonk to keep an eye on for sure.
Most definitely. And yeah, John, the only point I was going to add is I did EPG's preview before the season started, and that team is more than ready to make a run at a conference title. They've, kind of flirted with some teams in the past, but this year it seems like they're pretty locked in. They'll definitely be a fun one to watch, but we're kind of moving on now. Games under the radar. It was a popular segment a year ago. It's making its return. Games that we aren't covering that we think have a chance to be really good contests. John, we'll start with you, then to Gavin.
Well, I hope I'm not taking Gavin's pick. And again, I have a couple here. Again, there's this. I wish I could do all of them, but if I had to pick one, I'm going to go back to the heart of Illinois. I'm going to pick Gibson City, Melvin Sibley at DMAC. Both teams won big in week 1. Obviously DMAC is a HOI large team, GCMS is a HOI small team. So I think it kind of tilts the scales a little bit in DMAC's favor. But GCMS just a couple years ago was extremely strong. They were almost like the Ridgeview Lexington of what the Mustangs were last year. That used to be them not too long ago. I'm sure they're hungry. DMAC is obviously hungry as well. Both teams are 1-0 to start the year. I think that should be a real great game. If I have to pick an honorable mention, I have one in mind, but I'm not going to go until both of you guys go because I don't want to steal anybody's picks.
Yeah, I'm going to go with a bit of a different one as well, staying small school, because I think small school football is a lot of fun. I have a soft spot for big school football, but small school football is really the heart and soul, of the IHSA, I think. I'm going to go with Havana at Princeville. I think Princeville probably would be the favorite in that one, but Princeville's a team that have followed a little bit in recent years. They've been a team that has made the playoffs quite a bit. They're pretty successful for a small school, over the years. Havana, they lost week 1. It was a close game. They're a team that came off a 4-5 season, so they're a team that kind of just wants to turn that corner. Princeville, on the other hand, just, again, starting to put some pieces back together. There were winners in week 1, so this is a big game for both sides. If Havana wants to keep turning that corner, they can pull off a big road upset against the Princes, but if Princeville wants to keep things moving in the right direction, get back to that dominance, this would be a great big week 2 win.
Well, Gavin, I don't want to throw you under the bus because you definitely stole my pick. But I called a quick audible, and I'm going to go visit my old
Princes, Cody.
Okay, friends are wondering why that's so funny and it's getting some laughs out of the group. It's because in our group chat, we aren't picking the games that we call this week. So not to spoil what's coming up, but I had to pick between Gavin's game, and I had put in the chat, I've never seen a duck run down US 24 and kill a Prince. So I picked the Princes to win that game. And so I have to call a quick audible, but I'm going to go visit my friends down at Elmwood Brimfield. They're coming off a loss against Knoxville, but that's kind of a game that me and John, and I know in our group chat we had put earlier in the week, was kind of an under-the-radar game to watch for week 1. Knoxville came away, I think it was like 26-8 of it. being the final score. But this is a really tough stretch for Elmwood Brimfield. They've got 3 consecutive on the road, and I believe it's 1, 2, 3, 4 out of their next 5 on the road. So not necessarily just for this week, but for the next week, they have to go up against teams like Hamilton, Warsaw. They have EPG, Farmington, home against Mercer County, and then they're away at Macomb. So a really tough run of games for Elmwood Brimfield. So I'm going to say that they're going to be super competitive this week and look for a rebound week for EB.
Yeah, it's certainly a meat grinder of a stretch. And I was looking at EB's schedule this year, and I thought, wow, that is a really tough one. Obviously with that, that Lincoln Trail and Prairie Land Conference merger now, I think it makes things a lot interesting because, previously you had Knoxville, who was in the Lincoln Trail, you had EB, who's in the Prairie Land. Now they get to play each other, 2 very good teams. So I think there's going to be some great matchups. And also, going back to Gavin's game, Havana and Princeville, those are 2 teams that were right on the cusp of making the playoffs last year. Both teams went 4-5. Now both teams are in the Lincoln Land, which is, obviously the Lincoln Trail Prairie Land, excuse me. But they're in the small division now with a lot of schools that are, more their size. So, I think that both those teams certainly, could, finish near the top of that division as well. So those should be some great games. If I can give 2 honorable mentions real quick, I'd love to. One of them is IVC against Monticello. I haven't talked about IVC yet, but coming into the year, I thought, okay, this is a young team. They're maybe trying to rebuild just a little bit. They got a good defense, but they almost took down Paxton Buckley Loda in week 1. Bryce Ratcliffe, their quarterback, had a massive game. I think their wide receiver Ryan Adler had about 10 catches for over 100 yards and 3 touchdowns. So IVC, despite not winning that game, I think was the most impressive loss of week 1 around the area. And also, I know Bloomington Normal West on the bigger school side could be a great game as well. I know, not to spoil anything, but someone in our clutch group chat picked Bloomington to win that game, and I certainly think that it could actually happen. Normal West has got a lot, but so does Bloomington. So stay tuned to our CSM Pick'em whenever you're watching this. If it hasn't dropped already, it will be dropping very soon. So be sure to check that out and subscribe to CSM Overtime so you get that.
For sure. So as we kind of come to a close again, quicker episode, kind of as a welcome back. We're kind of on a slight time crunch. Me and John have to make it out to the game that we're going to talk about next. It's almost time for the Washington Panthers to begin for practice. And John, that kind of cues us in. But where are we going this week?
Yeah, we'll be at Washington against Kankakee, a really great matchup that we have our eyes on almost every year. 2 years ago, Kankakee came to Washington. I don't believe we broadcast that game. I think there was another really good one in the area. Obviously, Washington went to Kankakee last year. Now the K's come back. 3rd year in a row that these teams are playing. Washington still looking for their first win against Kankakee, but the K's come in real hot, defeating the number 1 team in Class 5A, the Nazareth Academy Roadrunners, 33-26. Still looking to do a little bit of research more on Kankakee, but my early impressions are it's a very fast team. They got a great quarterback in Lorenz Walters, and they have some very good running backs as well who stepped up big. And the biggest thing, I think, for the K's is coming into the year, it looks like they're going to have a young defense. And Nazareth, they had a 3-year starter at quarterback. Well, what the K's did is they made that 3-year starter, Logan Malachuk, go 16 for 41, threw a couple of interceptions, really frustrated him. And that kid is a good quarterback for Nazareth. And Kankakee really just shut him down for the most part. So, for Washington, Tyler Humphrey, their new quarterback's got to be ready to play with the big boys in his first year starting. Obviously led his team to a win against Caneland in week 1. I think a big key for Washington is going to be their speed on defense. I'm looking at Jace Harlan at linebacker for Washington to be a key player and an X factor in that game.
And Gavin, we'll throw it over to you. Obviously, you'll be away from us for the second week, but where are you headed, my friend?
I'll be in Dunlap territory this week, so it's going to be a good one between the Eagles and the Rocks. Rock Island coming to town. The Rocks are a bit of a new look this year. They've got a lot of juniors starting for them. I do think that they definitely have some top-end talent, some guys that are developing very quickly. Javion Clark-Pugh is at quarterback. The 6'3" junior will be leading the Rocks out under center. So there's a lot of potential. You're just going to see flashes, I think, this year from the Rocks. If things go to well together, you can put some things together in this game, they will have a chance. They have some exciting players, and they're definitely going to make it competitive. Although Dunlap, again, coming off a big Week 1 victory with their two great young quarterbacks, and again, a lot of really good up-and-coming depth. It should be a fun one to watch between a couple of teams that are figuring themselves out but progressing very quickly. So not going to be one you're going to want to miss if you want to bounce back and forth, or maybe get yourself a 2-computer, 2-TV, 2-phone setup. You got a couple of really good games you can watch on CSN this week.
For sure. Just to put one big bow on it all, obviously, I think I don't know if it was by choice or by coincidence, John, that you, Larry, and Joey scoped out these two games this week, because we could be looking at two teams that later in the year could be battling for the Mid-Illini Conference crown with just a couple weeks left in the season. But yeah, I think, John, putting a bow on our game when we go to Washington, I think it's I'll do the other side. I think it's up to Washington. Their playmakers on the outside, from the folks I've talked to around the area, that'll be having interest in that game. It's really going to come down to whether or not Washington can consistently move the ball. They're not worried at all about this defense. I think this defense is one of the best in Central Illinois. Washington's going to pack a real ground game in front of a home crowd too. But with that being said, thank you all for tuning into this return episode for the In the Clutch podcast. I'm Cody Roskens for Gavin Russell and Jonathan Michael. We will see you next week.